Welcome, everybody. Hello, hello. Good evening. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're just going to give it a couple minutes before we get started. Welcome to our live immigration Q&A. Again, if you're just joining, going to give it a few minutes before we jump into it. Please feel free to use the chat, introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining from, and maybe what you're hoping to learn this evening. All right. Thank you for joining us, despite the beautiful weather this evening, and in the Greater Toronto area at least. It is a beautiful evening, so thank you for spending your evening with us. Okay, we'll give it a couple more minutes. Hi, Gaganjot. Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us. Hello, hello. We are here with Aadil Mangalji. He is a very talented immigration lawyer who is here tonight to share his knowledge with us.
Hi,
Beautiful
everybody.
out here in Prince George, British Columbia. Ooh, I'm jealous. That sounds lovely.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and get started at 7:02. Welcome everybody to our live immigration Q&A. Again, I am here with Aadil Mangalji. He is an immigration lawyer and certified specialist, and tonight he'll be talking about refugee claims. And then we will have a chance to ask him our questions as well. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Keelan Stucci. I am a career coach with Devant. I've been with Devant for about 4.5 years, facilitating webinars. So some of you may recognize me. I recognize some of the names in the chat for sure. So thanks for joining another Devant webinar this evening. If you are not familiar with Devant, here's a little bit of a snapshot of some of our team. And basically, it is Devant's goal to make it easier for people to work and stay in Canada after you have graduated. So just some housekeeping before we dive into it. We are in webinar mode, so you are all muted and you are not on camera. So feel free to relax. Nobody can see you. No need to use video. And this session is being recorded and it will be shared with all of you by email. It'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel. I think it's usually uploaded as a private video, so you'll need the link in order to view it, but that will be emailed to you shortly. Please feel free to utilize the question and answer feature. You can find it at the bottom of your screen. Please use it anytime during the webinar. Adil's going to go through his slides, and then if we have some time at the end, we'll go through the Q&A. Please use the Q&A feature, though, just because in the chat, they tend to get lost, so we might not see them. And if you're interested in future Devant events, you can find those at devant.ca/all events. I will put those in the chat. Just a little bit more about Devant. So like I said, it is Devant's goal to help international students and newcomers to get hired in Canada so you can stay in Canada after you have finished your studying. We have career coaches like myself to help you. We have industry expert at our live events. We host live events via Zoom every single week. The Devant portal has AI-driven tools to help polish your resume, help you with your interview skills, your labor market knowledge. And we can also help introduce you to employers who can help you find a job or even just for information as you're job searching in Canada. So Devant.ca is the website. And I just want to make sure that everybody knows that the information in this session does not constitute legal advice. So please refer always to Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada for the most up-to-date information, and consult a registered immigration professional for personalized advice. The advice tonight is going to be very general, but I think, Adil, you put at the end of the slideshow information for booking with LM Law Group if people are interested.
I did. So
Perfect.
through all of that.
Okay. So I'm going to pass it over to Aadil Mangalji, and please take it away.
Okay, I'm happy to be here and thank you for having me. I'm really excited to kind of be speaking about refugee claims. I am the lawyer at our firm that is the partner that's in charge of the refugee claim processes and the litigation department. So that's why you're hearing from me today. What I really want to go through today is this major question about refugee claims these days, and they've come up a lot in the news. There's some major changes that are being made to the refugee program, especially for students and for people on work permits that have been here for a long time but haven't gotten PR. Essentially, there is this huge conundrum that we're seeing more and more right now, and it's the conundrum, and it's kind of what I've titled this presentation is I can't get PR, but I can't go home. What do I do? And a lot of times, this is situations where individuals have for been here, they've either come on study permits, on work permits, and while they're here, or even right before they came, things really changed back home. The situation unfortunately took a terrible turn for the worst, and due to a fear of persecution, they're unable to go back home. And the question always is, what do I do? And this becomes even more pertinent in a time where we have permanent residence becoming so much harder for people to get, especially students who have graduated, and we'll go through that. So the general rule that has always been what immigration lawyers advise, and I think even more so, and I'll explain a little bit more in our presentation, is the refugee claim is the last thing that you go through. You go through every other immigration process before you go through the refugee claim. And this is for a number of reasons. The first, and I think something that a lot of people don't understand, is that when you make a refugee claim, you have with it, the moment you make it, you are given a conditional removal order. And what that is something that says that if you are refused or you get to the end of the refugee process and you were not successful, you must leave essentially immediately, that you're no longer allowed in Canada. And this order not only speeds up removal at the end, but it makes you ineligible for all of the other economic programs. So what I tell people is when you're making a refugee program, you are choosing a path. And you can't continue to be doing express entry or the provincial nomination programs, which we so often talk about on these, once you do the refugee claim. The other thing that's really important for people to understand is that once you make a refugee claim, you can almost not go back home. There is a principle that's called cessation, that if you are a refugee and a permanent resident to Canada and you return back to your home country, and not only return, have any interactions with your home country, even if you get a passport from that country or do any consular affairs with that country, that refugee status can be taken away. So I always tell people this is big if you have people, family back home, if there's tragedies, if somebody passes away, if somebody gets sick, you cannot go back home to see them without putting your status in real risk. And so we always say that it's our final option. But that doesn't mean that we never do it. There are very serious and certain places where it's our only option, and we do look at the refugee claim as an option in those cases. This whole issue has become even more pertinent very recently with the introduction of Bill C5, which is currently in second reading. And Bill C5 has made things very, very, very bad for people who want to make refugee claims now. And it is something that we, as immigration lawyers and practitioners, are very, very critical of the government for bringing in. And in my opinion, it's something that's going to be gutting the refugee system in Canada. I think it's the most consequential change to the refugee system that has been done in the last decade. But basically, what Bill C5 says is that if a claim is made more than 1 year before arriving in Canada, you don't get to have a hearing at the refugee board, which is what is commonly happens in refugee claim. But all you get is what we call a PRA, a pre-removal risk assessment. This means that an officer, just a government employee at Immigration Canada, will read your risk on paper, do a basic interview, and determine if you're a refugee or not. The rates of acceptance for PRAs are way lower than if you go to the Immigration and Refugee Board. And there are major differences. And I've kind of put the big ones up here. So at the Immigration and Refugee Board, the most important thing is that it's an independent tribunal. So it is kind of like a court. It works not with the government. The government is a party to proceedings at the Immigration and Refugee Board. And so you get an independent trained tribunal officer that understands constitutional law, that is an expert in how hearings work, in country condition evidence, and that's what you get at the Immigration Refugee Board. What they want to give now is just a plain IRCC officer. So just like any government officer that, right now looks at spousal sponsorships or looks at any other type of application is just going to be trained to be doing risk assessments. And that is a very sad situation because, to be very honest, I've been doing this for many years and I can tell you that they do not know what they're doing when it comes to risk assessments. They're very complicated assessments. The other thing is that at the Immigration Refugee Board, most people, if the first stage gets it wrong, you have an appeal right to the Refugee Appeal Division. In the PRAs, there are no appeals. And even more so at the IRB, if you lose the appeal, you can take it to what we call judicial review. So you can take it to court and essentially they cannot remove you until the court makes a determination. But for the PRA, if you take that to court, they can start removal proceedings against you they even before the judicial review is decided. And probably what I think might be the most problematic in terms of procedural rights is that the IRB, you get a real hearing. You get to go before a board member, they ask you questions. Your lawyer gets to participate in it, it gets to ask you follow-up questions, gets to make legal submissions. It's a full comprehensive hearing, just like you're at court. In a PRA, all you get is a basic interview. The professor can ask you questions. Your lawyer can't really participate. They can ask some clarifications, but they can't really do anything. And they can't make submissions unless they're invited to do so. So you just don't get any protections. And so now what we're seeing is most people that have been here for more than a year aren't going to be able to even get a refugee claim at the refugee board. They're going to have to do a pre-removal risk assessment. What's also very scary about the bill is that it's retroactive. So it goes backwards in time. So if you've already been here for a year, you're likely to not be able to get a refugee claim. And so that has made our advice even stronger about looking at every other option before making a refugee claim. So some of the things I know Elizabeth's gone through a lot in a lot of these sessions, so I'm not going to go through them very, very deeply, but some of the options that we look at when somebody comes to us saying, I want to make a refugee claim, is if they have time still on their work permits or on their study permits, if then we kind of look at the express entry system. And as we all know now with express entry, just graduating and working for a year is not a guarantee to permanent residence like it used to be. You need something that's going to up your point system. And the two big ones right now that we keep talking about are French, learning French up to a moderate to advanced level, and also having overseas work experience. So being able to get that before um, the other ones that we often look at, even before refugee claims, I always ask people, are you in a relationship? Either married or common law. And a lot of people don't know that common law is a type of sponsorship that can happen. So if you've lived with a Canadian permanent resident or a Canadian citizen for more than a year in a marital-like relationship, then that person can sponsor you. And we would always do that before we look at a refugee claim. Other ones that we look at are humanitarian and compassionate applications. These, in refugee claims, they look at persecution. Humanitarian and compassionate applications look at if people have been established in Canada and the hardship that they would face when they go back home. So they're similar but very different in a lot of ways. And you can either do a refugee claim or an H&C. You cannot do both at the same time. And so we often, in certain times, will look and see which one is better. And that's always a question you really want to bring up with your legal counsel, because there's a lot of issues that go into determining which one to do. Another one that we've been looking at a lot right now is using your postgraduate work permit to work as a caregiver and going through the caregiver stream. So the purpose of this is not to tell you which program you want to go into, but the purpose of this is to say, when you go to a lawyer, and especially if your lawyer is telling you or your consultant is telling you, let's do a refugee claim, right off the bat, you want to canvass everything else before you do a refugee claim. But sometimes we decide that that's the only option. And these are situations right now, for sure, people who have been here less than a year, we might want to do it very quickly before we get to that 1 year mark and only get a PRA. So there is a bit more rush these days because of it. The other situation is in cases where none of those other programs are going to work. I don't have a partner. I'm not going to have enough express entry points. But I'm really scared to go home either because of a situation that's happening that's going to lead to persecution. So in Canada, it's always important to think about who is a refugee, because I always get this idea that if it's bad back home, then I should be a refugee. And that's not true. So in certain situations, just because there's a war in your country, or there's a lot of poverty in your country, or there's a lot of criminality, does not necessarily make you a refugee. A refugee is not made to alleviate anything that's happening back home. It's very specific. And so what I tell people is that we really need to assess your case to determine if you meet the actual definition of what a refugee is. And in Canada, we kind of have two types of refugees or protected persons. So the first one is based on what we call Section 96 of the Act. And this was drawn from the Refugee Convention. This is your traditional situation of a refugee. And these are people that are going to face persecution based on one of the enumerated grounds. And the enumerated grounds are race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So that's things like queer individuals would fall under membership in a particular social group. Female victims of domestic violence would fall under that. So there's certain groups that have been identified, but it's not just because things are bad back home. You have to be persecuted because of your race, because of the religion that you are part of, because of your nationality or ethnicity, or your political opinion. Okay, so it has to be a very particular type of risk. This is drawn from the Refugee Convention, and we have to, in these cases, be able to prove that risk. And it's not proving on a 100%, we have to prove that there's more than a mere possibility that you'll face persecution. Okay, so in law, we always talk about thresholds, and more than a mere possibility is less than 50%. Okay. The other type of refugees that we have, it comes from Section 97. So these are people that are not part of these enumerated grounds. This is if you're going to face torture or cruel and unusual treatment or punishment. Okay. This comes from the Torture Convention. And this one, you have to be able to prove it on a balance of probabilities. So that's 50% or more. Okay, so the evidence that you need to prove that you're going to face torture or a risk to life or cruel and unusual treatment from the government that you're going back to is much higher. Your burden of proof is a lot higher. So you need a lot more evidence to demonstrate it. People then say, if I'm going to make a refugee claim, what does it look like? Okay. And so what I tell people is there are a number of steps that happen. If we decide that we want to make a refugee claim, then there are a number of situations that we will, steps that we'll do right off the bat. The first is that you would sit with somebody and they assess your claim. So they say, okay, here's your risk. And they will go through, because all of the refugee decisions are online and can be researched, and they'll say, yes, your profile has come up. Sexual orientation from Uganda. That claim tends to be really strong. I'm facing risk from gangs in Mexico. That risk tends to be a lot harder to prove and determine and can be a weaker claim. I'm facing a risk of from an ex-partner because of domestic violence, and I'm from a Caribbean country. They would look up that country and see what domestic violence laws look like there. Okay. They not only have to prove that you're at risk, but they have to prove a couple of things. Okay. So they have to prove that you're going to be at risk of persecution. They also have to prove that you can't get what we call state protection in your own country, so that the police there are not going to help you and that you've tried. And the third thing that they have to prove is that you can't go anywhere else in the country before coming to Canada to be safe. And that's called internal flight alternative. So those are situations where we don't just have to prove one thing, but all three of those have to be there for you to be able to be a successful refugee, and you can lose a claim based on any of those. If a board member, for example, says, oh yeah, I know that you were attacked as a gay man in a small village in your country, but you can go to the main city and there's a big queer community there, then you could lose a claim based on that. And so it's really important that the counsel that you're using is assessing all of these issues, not just are you at risk or not. Okay. The other thing that's really important is that you can make a risk even if you haven't experienced anything. So a lot of situations have happened where somebody has come to Canada and then things got really, really, really bad at home. Situations that come to mind very recently are women from Iran, when there was a huge situation 2 years ago that blew up in the country, and a lot of it was very unsafe for women to be there. All of a sudden, what might have not been a great ref claim when you were there or you haven't experienced it, things changed while you were here. And so that became quite a strong ref claim. So it's really important that you understand that you don't have to actually have experienced it yet, but it's forward looking. If you were to send back, is there a likelihood that you would experience it? Okay. So once a lawyer goes through all of these, then what they're going to do is write out your narrative and write out forms. And that narrative is what we call a BOC, a basis of claim form. And that to me is the most important part of a refugee claim, because that's where you get to tell your story. And that's where you're essentially going to be quizzed on at the refugee hearing. So it's very critical. If you have a consultant that basically says, just write out your story and give it to me, that's not how it should be done. You should be really, this is where you should spend the most amount of time to make sure that the story is clear and concise and tells a narrative. It's not just, vomiting everything that happened to you, to an officer, but it goes in chronological order and is told in a narrative format because that's really critical as to what's going to be read. Once your claim is submitted and it's submitted online, then you're going to be called in for an eligibility interview. Okay. And everybody always gets scared at this first part because they say, oh my God, I'm having a hearing. But that's not what the first interview is about. The first interview is just to make sure that you are allowed to make a refugee claim. And there's certain groups of people that are not allowed to make refugee claims. And one of those is people with serious criminality. If you have serious criminality, you're not allowed to make a refugee claim, and you can be ineligible to make a refugee claim. Also, people who have might have human rights abuses or have worked with organizations on terror lists. Those are all situations that could lead to ineligibility. Okay. And for criminality, you have to remember that it's not just about criminality that actually happened, but if there's reasons to believe that you had committed a crime, even if you had not in your country been actually charged and convicted of. So that's what the eligibility interview looks at. If you don't have any of those, then you have nothing to worry about. If you do, then you should definitely canvass that with a professional ahead of time. Once that happens, then that part is taken care of by the government. And then they refer you to the tribunal. That's what we talked about before, the Immigration and Refugee Board. And once the tribunal has it, then you're in an independent place that the government is just a party to. They have no control over the tribunal. Tribunal members are independent and get to make their own decision. They're kind of like judges in that way. So it is the best place for a refugee to be. Okay. Then you wait and you wait and wait and wait for your hearing. But while you're waiting, you're not doing nothing. You're preparing for your hearing. So when you went through your whole story, your lawyer should have given you a document list. And you want to start collecting as many documents as you can to prove the risk. So if, for example, you are saying, I belong to this religious group that's being persecuted, then you have to get a letter from the religious leadership that demonstrates that you're part of that group. If something happened to you back home and you have medical records, then you need to show that. If you went to the police there, you need to show that. So you need to start collecting all of this documentation that's going to be due prior to your hearing. Okay. Hearings right now are taking about a year, kind of getting up to a year and 3 months, almost to a year and a half before you have a hearing. And hearings right now, mostly, unless you ask for something different, are being done online, just like this, on Teams instead of Zoom. But basically, what happens is you'll have a member, they'll ask you questions, okay, about your claim. They're basically testing what we call credibility. Are you telling the truth? And they do that by making sure that your answers line up with what you put in your basis of claim form that before. And that's why it's very critical that everything in your basis of claim form is right, because it's very hard to change afterwards. Okay. After the hearing, basically what will happen is you'll either get a positive decision, which is great, and then you can apply for permanent residency to Canada. So you're a protected person at that point. Then you have to apply for permanent residency. That takes another about year and a half. And then after you get permanent residency, and then you've been in Canada for 3 years, then you can apply for citizenship. But if you're negative, then you can, in most cases, make an appeal. There are some situations where you can't make an appeal. And if you're negative there, also, you can seek judicial review at the federal court. So there's a lot of other steps that can be done that are looking backwards and saying, well, did the first decision maker make a legal error or not? And so the moment you get a negative decision, you want to talk to a lawyer that is very comfortable with appeals and judicial reviews, because those are a whole different beast. So that is pretty much the process. As you can see, it's a pretty complicated and very long process. But in the end, it can lead to successful permanent residency. That's kind of an overview of the refugee process. There's a lot of stuff in there, but I wanted to kind of simplify it just so that people know kind of what they would be facing if they were to go through the refugee process and things to think about even before you make a claim, because it's very critical to do that planning and not just run into making a claim, but to really think about it in advance. And I'm open here to take any questions that might become up.
Amazing. Thank you so, so much, Adil. That was quick, but it had so much great information in it. So thank you. We did have some questions come in. Some of them are things that you've touched on before, but maybe if you could elaborate a little bit on some of these
Sure.
things.
Yeah,
And
we leave a lot of
every
time for questions.
Yes, we do have a lot of time for questions, so please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A box. And I'm just gonna go in order that they've asked. So again, you mentioned this briefly, but this person is asking if they're coming from a country that is not necessarily a country that's experiencing war. What are some of the ways that they may be able to argue that they will suffer if they go back home? And what are their chances of getting PR based on this or a refugee claim based on this?
Okay, so this is kind of what I touched on at the beginning. So a refugee is a very specific defined thing. It's not made for just people that are suffering, whole blank. Otherwise, half the world would be coming to Canada as refugees. It's made for people that are facing persecution, okay, because of they belong to one of the enumerated grounds. So I am facing persecution because of gender. I am facing it because of sexual orientation. I'm facing it because of the religion that I'm part of. I'm facing it particularly because of the ethnicity that I'm facing. If it's just something that everybody in the whole country is facing, then you're likely not going to win a refugee claim. It's got to be very particular to being part of one of those enumerated grounds, or the government is under Section 97, the government is after you or somebody is after you, and they're going to make you face cruel and unusual treatment or torture or a risk to your life. So it's got to be very, 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 very high threshold, not just, the economy is really bad back home, I can't go back there, or the crime is really bad back home. Those are not good refugee claims. So it's really important to sit with a lawyer, assess what is your actual risk that you're facing when you go home. What country are you from? Which of these groups do you belong to? And are you facing that risk because of these groups? And then they will do research to see what is the board kind of thinking about when they do this.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, like you said, I think when people think of refugees, the definition that they think of isn't necessarily what the actual definition is. So thank you for clarifying that. Again, something that you touched on briefly, but this person is wondering what the current status is of Bill C5.
Yeah, so Bill C5 is in second reading. There is a lot of pressure being put on. We know that we're in a minority government. Unfortunately, this is something that the Americans want. This is something that the conservatives want. It's something that the liberals are pushing. So we're seeing that there is broad support for it, but we are fighting to see amendments. So it is in second reading right now, and it's being pushed through quite aggressively. We're hoping at least to get that provision amended because it it is very problematic. I do think even if it does go, to me, there's a lot of constitutional problems with that. So I think it will be going to the courts pretty quickly after that, in terms of a challenge. Um, the reason being is we already kind of went through this. We used to just have what we call PDURCs, which were the version of PRAWs that we have right now. And there was a very popular, one of the most important Supreme Court decisions in Singh basically said that you have to give people a real hearing and real procedural protections because this is their life. To very simplify a very important decision, that's what it said. And basically, I think the PRA does not give those types of protections. And I think that this is kind of ripe for challenge as soon as it comes out. So we'll see if it does get passed, and if it does, we'll see what the courts do with it because it's very unfortunate that this was put into this bill. It was put in a bill about protecting borders. I think this does nothing to protect borders. This was to punish people from making refugee claims.
Do you have any suggestions on how we can stay up to date on what's going on with the bill?
Yeah, to be very honest, there's a lot of commentary on it online. Basically, a lot of people are speaking on it. I know I've been putting up things on LinkedIn and some issues around it. So kind of stay up to date with us. We will also be putting up newsletters as as it's being described. And you can
Amazing.
follow us
Thank
on
you.
any of those links that are up there.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, this question, it's a little bit lengthy, so I will summarize it a little bit. But it sounds like this person, is under the impression that they only have a few years left to live. They don't want to spend their remaining days at home. They don't want to return to their home country, but it sounds like they're worried about the length of a refugee claim. So I think you said around like 1 year, 3 months-ish. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. So it's kind of different in a pre-Bill C5 world and a post-Bill C5 world. So in a pre right now, you're looking at it's taking about a year to a year and a half to get a refugee claim. But again, there's the appeals process and things like that. So it could take quite a bit longer. Um, if people are sick though and they don't have a lot of time, it's also something that where we might look at a humanitarian and compassionate application as opposed to a refugee claim because refugee claims very specifically right within the convention, it states that they're not there for people who can't get health care or anything back home. That's what a humanitarian compassionate claim is much more decided. So that's the first thing I would say. Second, refugee claims, yeah, do tend to take a long time. Um, the good thing, though, is while there is a refugee claim in process, you do have access to federal healthcare. You don't get provincial healthcare, but there is a federal healthcare program for people that are in the process, and you can get work permits and work while the situation's happening.
Beautiful. Again, just an example of maybe somebody that might want to book a session with LM Law Group. Because like we said at the beginning, it's hard to answer specific questions when Adil doesn't know your specific circumstances and things like that. So a meeting might be the best option. Okay, this person says that they have been volunteering in Canada, participating in various groups here, as well as working as much as they can, and they're wondering if they can use this to argue that they've successfully assimilated into Canadian society and if that will help with their refugee claim at all.
Okay, so that's a great question. A refugee claim does not care about how good of a person you are. You could be getting the Order of Canada right now for all your volunteer work, and nobody cares at the refugee claim. A refugee claim is based only on what I had spoken about before. Are you to face persecution when you go back home? You could be the greatest person in the world, but if you're not going to face persecution, they don't care. You could be a terrible person who does nothing. But if you face persecution when you go back home, then you're a refugee. What you are thinking of, and that's where it's different, is the humanitarian and compassionate application. A humanitarian and compassionate application is what I call the begging application. So that's where you go and say, you know what, I should be able to stay here because I have family, I'm established in Canada, I have worked here, I have all this hardship. If I go back home, I can't, I have this illness and I can't get care for myself there. It's basically the application where I say, if you tell your story and you make somebody cry, then they will accept you. And so that's where they really care. What have you been doing in Canada? Are you a good person? Have you been volunteering? Have you been working? How have you established yourself? That is very critical to an agency application. Absolutely irrelevant to a refugee claim. We don't even put in evidence about it. We don't even touch it. Nobody will ask you about it. it doesn't play out at all in a refugee proceeding.
Interesting. Thank you for clarifying. I'm gonna go through, just so everyone's aware, I'm going through an order, but I'm specifically targeting the ones that are about refugee status. And then if we have time, we'll go back and answer some of the other ones. This person is asking how much evidence and onus is placed on the refugee applicant to prove what they're saying is true and accurate.
That's a great question. And the answer is all of the onus is put on the refugee applicant. So the board will not be doing anything. People always say, well, if they wanted this, why didn't they ask the government for this? Or why didn't they ask, through their MPs or something like that? Or why didn't they ask me if they wanted something? I could have given it to them. They don't tell you at all what they want. It is your job to build the case, to tell the story and then basically prove each major element of your story and also to prove why you can't seek protection in your own home country. So, country condition evidence and research is always done for that. And also why you can't go anywhere else in the country. And often, it's a very strange situation because you don't even know what will be an issue for the board member. And the board member will say, well, why didn't you put a document about this? And you've just kind of got to really almost be psychic at the very beginning and think of every issue that will come up and present evidence against that. And so it's really important to have a very seasoned person when you're doing a refugee claim because they have gone through so many of these that they think of every issue that can come up and what evidence you would need. But the board, the government side, nobody is going to ask you for anything and they'll hold it against you if you don't have what they imagine you should have there.
Yeah. Very good to know. This person's question is based on religion. So it sounds like they were following a religion. They have changed to a new religion, which is not accepted in their home country. They know that their siblings, relatives, other people in the country will not be accepting of this new religion that they're following. They've been in Canada for 12 months, and they're wondering if this is a reason to apply for refugee status or not.
Yeah, so it definitely can be. And these are what we call conversion claims or religious conversion claims. They would fit, remember, we had talked about those possible groups, and you would fall under the religion class that you fall under. So you would have to be able to prove not just that, people aren't going to like me and they're going to be mean to me. It's got to be very, very, very serious discrimination and that discrimination has to amount to persecution. So, because I'm part of this new religion, I won't be able to find a house. I won't be able to go to school. I won't be able to find work. It has to really impact your life. Okay. Or you have to prove risk to your life or well being. So, I will be attacked and the state is not going to protect me or the state itself is going to attack me. So it's got to be one of those things. So my family will come after me and the police are not going to care, or the government's going to come after me because I've converted. So it is kind of a very high threshold that you have to show, but definitely this could be grounds for a claim. And in certain countries, conversion can be very, very, very problematic and for people and can definitely be the basis of a refugee claim.
Thank you. Okay. There was a question in the chat. I know that you had mentioned that some of the advice that you give people is to learn French. They're asking what level of French, if there is a certain level that you recommend attaining to help extend their stay here in Canada.
Okay, so this is not about refugee claims or humanitarian compassion at all. So this is part of what I was saying that always look at other options first. And the big one is express entry. So this is particular, and I know we've done a lot of sessions on express entry, so I won't get through it all, but they're definitely there. But essentially now for express entry, you kind of need a lot more points. And so you're basically getting higher levels of points the higher you go on French. And so we like to see when you're writing an exam what we call CLB sevens at least to get a very high or competitive number of points. And that's kind of what we call intermediate French. So you should be quite skilled in it, and you would take the TEF, la test d'évaluation français, and that will tell you where you actually are. But it is both in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. You would have to be able to get to quite a high level.
Very interesting. Thank you. Another question about if maybe a refugee claim is correct for them. This person says they are currently in Canada. Their work permit is expiring in 1 year. They've been experiencing a lot of medical issues, but the doctors still aren't necessarily sure what's wrong with them. And they're worried that they're going to be sent back home, where the level of healthcare is private, costly, and lower quality than it is here in Canada. Is that a reason to file a refugee claim or not?
Okay, so very specifically, as I had mentioned before, inability to get healthcare or not being able to get healthcare is not a basis for a refugee claim, even just because there's private healthcare systems or it's too expensive or I can't get it. That will not be a winning claim. Okay. There are situations where healthcare can be relevant to a refugee claim. Things like because I'm part of this ethnicity, or I'm part of this gender, or I'm part of this particular group, they won't give me healthcare because of discrimination. That could be part of a refugee claim. But if it's I can get it, it's just private and I can't afford it, that would not be a refugee claim situation. That's where you're again looking more at that humanitarian and compassionate application that we talked about before. So because you can only do one, it's really critical to get the right one, because if you do a refugee claim based on that, you can't do a humanitarian and compassion at the same time. And so you've really done the wrong application. So it's really critical to think about it in advance.
Thank you. Yes, so very, very specific reasons for filing a refugee claim. This person is asking, approximately how much does the refugee claim application cost, including lawyers' fees and any other applicable fees?
For that one, to be honest, you'd have to do a consultation because it's very, very different based on there's simple refugee claims that can be proven quite quickly and that we can call expedited refugee claims. There are extremely complicated ones where I've done 4 to 5 day hearings where so basically a lawyer would have to go through your situation, look at first, are you eligible to make one? What does it look like? What does the claim? Sometimes you have to get specialists involved. But sometimes it's really, really simple. There's not a lot to prove. It can be based on your gender and country condition evidence, and that's it. So it varies a lot. So you'd really want to have a consultation about it. And it might be a good time to plug that for us. We do offer a discount for anybody if you mentioned that you're from Devant, that it is $100, which is a discounted consultation rate for us.
Amazing. Thank you. Yes, definitely take advantage of that. And I think as long as they mention that they heard about you through Devant, then they
Exactly.
get that
Exactly. Yeah, but do let
amazing.
us know because we don't have access to everybody's names, so just make sure that they do that.
Correct. Yes. Everyone make sure that if you're reaching out, let them know that you came from Devant's. Okay. I've got quite a lengthy one in the chat that I'm going to try my best to summarize. And we keep in mind, everyone, we only have about 10 minutes left, so just maybe a couple more questions. This person has come to Canada as a student. They say that there's ongoing conflict between the government and certain groups in their home country, and they served in the National Army of their home country for many years, and people are specifically targeting people who served in the army. They said that they've been unable to visit their family because of this. They actually did go back home, and they experienced a lot of hardship due to their army connection. And I think they're asking if this is an opportunity to file a refugee claim or not.
Okay, so this is certainly one that you want to speak to somebody before, because there's two things that are at play here. One, can being part of the military or a government organization be a refugee claim? Yes, it's part of that particular social group that we had talked about. So if you worked for the army or worked for the government, that could be the basis of a claim. On the other side, though, whenever somebody says army, I get a little bit scared because we talked about that eligibility requirement before. And one of the things that they will often look at is, are you part of an organization that committed human rights abuses? And even if you didn't do it, it doesn't matter. If you were part of the army when it was doing human rights abuses or had been, or even if you weren't, you were stationed somewhere completely different and the human rights abuses were happening later, you could still be ineligible. So in that console, what we would really look at is which army, when, why, has that been determined as an ineligible group? If it has, do you have a defense against what happened? Like basically you said, no, I can't do that or something like that. And then once we look at it, eligibility and you pass that, then maybe it could be the basis of a refugee claim. So if there was a change in government and you were part of the old guard or the old government and that whole group is being targeted, yes, it could be the basis of a refugee claim. So you certainly should speak to somebody before making one, because I've seen a lot of people go to consultants and consultants say, great, let's go ahead. And then they find out that the person's ineligible in the refugee process. And at that point, you're in big trouble because you can't backtrack it.
Thank you for clarifying. Can a refugee claim be expedited to reduce the waiting time? And if so, what are some of the reasons that it could be expedited?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, to deal with the backlog, the IRB always complains about the backlog, and we always say, "Great, why don't you expedite so many claims?" There's some that are no-brainers. If you can prove that somebody is part of this group, and this group at all times is going to be persecuted in that country. Queer, trans individuals in many countries. Women in a lot of countries face intense, severe discrimination. It's very easy to determine if somebody's a woman or not, and if they're from that country. So we always say there are expedited claims. Unfortunately, the board doesn't use them as much as they should. Um, there's not a lot that you can do. The board kind of goes through and assesses whether it is a claim that is eligible for expedite. Your lawyer can put in evidence in advance and kind of request it in certain situations. But generally speaking, they will assess, determine if it's a good claim for expedite, and then put it through the expedite process. But it's not used as much as it should be, and unfortunately. So you're really probably, I tell people, always plan like you're going through the full process. If you get an expedite, that's a cherry on top.
Perfect. Okay, we're almost at 8 o'clock, so I think I'm going to wrap it up unless there are any questions that you noticed, Adil, that I missed regarding refugee claims.
No, I think you did a great job of going through them and summarizing.
Perfect. Okay, so everybody, before we change the slide, make sure you take a picture of this slide, you write down the information, you follow LM Law Group on all of their socials, and make sure to write down that email and that phone number. And if you do reach out, be sure to say that you came from this Devant workshop so you can get that special rate. And if you could go to the next slide, I'm just going to quickly discuss some of our upcoming Devant events. So I'm just going to put the link in the chat for registration. But next week, I just want to flag that we have our Ask a Recruiter event. Very similar to this, except instead of an immigration lawyer, it will be with a Canadian recruiter. So if you are currently job searching, this is a really great event to ask questions to a recruiter. Anything from like what you should put on your resume, how to interview properly, how to get your LinkedIn noticed by recruiters, all of those things. So that is next Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. And I put the link in the chat for registration for that. You do need to register in order to get the Zoom link sent to your inbox. And that is everything. Yes, you will get the email of this recording. So this session has been recorded. As soon as it is uploaded onto the Javant YouTube channel, you will get sent a link in your inbox. And I believe it's a private video, so you have to actually get the link to your inbox. But if you received the Zoom link for this, you will also receive the recording as soon as it is ready. And I want to echo what this person says. Thank you so, so much, Adil. You were so knowledgeable in all of these matters. I 100% agree. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening to answer all of our questions and to walk through the refugee claim process in Canada. I learned a lot as well, so thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful speaking to you all. Bye-bye.
Awesome. Good night, everybody. Take care. Thank you.